The Alchemy of Happiness, Chapter 2. The Knowledge of God. It is a well-known saying of the Prophet that he who knows himself knows God, that is, by contemplation of his own being and attributes, man arrives at some knowledge of God. But since many who contemplate themselves do not find God, it follows that there must be some special way of doing so. As a matter of fact, there are two methods of arriving at this knowledge, but one is so abstruse that it is not adopted to ordinary intelligence and therefore is better left unexplained. The other method is as follows. When a man considers himself, he knows that there was a time when he was non-existent. As it is written in the Quran, does it not occur to man that there was a time when he was nothing? Further, he knows that he was made out of a drop of water, in which there was neither intellect nor hearing, sight, head, hands, and feet. For this, it is obvious that whatever degree of perfection he may have arrived at, he did not make himself, nor can he now make a single hair. How much more helpless then was his condition when he was a mere drop of water. Thus, as we have seen in the first chapter, he finds in his own being reflected in miniature, so to speak, the power, wisdom, and love of the Creator. If all the sages of the world were assembled and their lives prolonged for an indefinite time, they could not effect any improvement in the construction of a single part of the body. For instance, in the adaptation for the front and side teeth to the mastication of food, and in the construction of the tongue, salivating glands, and throat for its deglutition, we find a contrivance which cannot be improved upon. Similarly, whoever considers his hand with its 5 fingers of unequal lengths, 4 of them with 3 joints, and the thumb with only 2, and the way in which it can be used for grasping, or for carrying, or for smiting, will frankly acknowledge that no amount of human wisdom could better it by altering the number and the arrangement of the fingers, or in any other way. When a man further considers how his various wants of food, lodging are amply supplied from the storehouse of the creation, he becomes aware that God's mercy is as great as his power and wisdom. As he has himself said, "My mercy is greater than my wrath," and according to the prophet saying, God is more tender to his servants than a mother to her child. Thus, from his own creation, man comes to know God's existence from the wonders of his bodily frame, God's power and wisdom, and from the ample provision made for his various needs, God's love. In this way, the knowledge of oneself becomes a key to the knowledge of God. Not only are man's attributes a reflection of God's attributes, but the mood of existence of man's soul affords some insight into God's mood of existence. That is to say, both God and the soul are invisible, indivisible, unconfined by the space and time, and outside the categories of quantity and quality, nor can the ideas of shape, color, or size attach to them. People find it hard to form a conception of such realities, but a similar difficulty attaches to the conception of our everyday feelings, such as anger, pain, pleasure, or love. They are thought concepts and cannot be recognized by the senses, whereas quality and quantity are sense concepts. Just as the ear cannot take cognizance of color, nor the eye of sound, so in conceiving of the ultimate realities, God and the soul, we find ourselves in a region in which sense concepts can bear no part. So much, however, we can see that as God is the ruler of the universe, and being himself beyond space and time, quantity and quality, governs things that are so conditioned, so that soul rules the body and its members, being itself invisible, indivisible, and not located in any special part. For how can the indivisible be located in that which is divisible? From all this, we see how true is the saying of the prophet, God created man in his own likeness. And as we arrive at some knowledge of God's essence and attributes from the contemplation of the soul's essence and attributes, so we come to understand God's method of working and government. and delegation of power to angelic forces by observing how each of us governs his own little kingdom. To take a simple instance, suppose a man wishes to write the name of God. First of all, the wish is conceived in his heart. It is then conveyed to the brain by the vital spirits. The form of the word God takes shape in the thought chambers of the brain. Then it travels by the nerve channels and sets in motion the fingers, which in their turn set in motion the pen, and thus the name God is traced on paper exactly as it had been conceived in the writer's brain. Similarly, when God wills a thing, it appears in the spiritual plane, which in the Quran is called the throne. From the throne it passes by a spiritual current to a lower plane called the chair. Then the shape of it appears on the tablet of destiny, when, by the mediation of the force called angels, it assumes actuality and appears in the earth in the form of plants, trees, and animals, representing the will and thought of God, as the written letters represent the wish conceived in the heart, and the shape represent in the brain of the writer. No one can understand a king but a king. Therefore, God has made each of us a king in miniature, so to speak, over a kingdom which is an infinitely reduced copy of his own. In the kingdom of man, God's throne is represented by the soul, the archangel by the heart, the chair by the brain, the tablet by the treasure chamber of thought,